When a wealthy couple hired what seemed like the perfect nanny for their special needs daughter, they thought they'd finally found a way to balance family life with their social obligations. The woman's credentials appeared flawless, her demeanor professional and caring. But when the mother returned home unexpectedly one evening, she walked in on a scene that would make her blood run cold. What happened next would shatter their family's sense of security and destroy an innocent child's life forever. Before we dive into this shocking story that will make you think twice about who you let care for your loved ones, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The gentle whirring of machinery filled the Carter mansion as Lorraine watched the technician make final adjustments to the newly installed stairlift. A top-of-the-line model, costing more than most cars, wound its way up the sweeping staircase. The woman, 5 feet tall, dressed in her soft lilac dress, stood in the grand foyer of their sprawling mansion, its high ceilings and marble floors a testament to the Carter family's wealth. Beside her, her husband Marcus was reviewing the handover documents, pen poised to sign the quality control document. Imani sat in her wheelchair, eyes wide with excitement, as she admired the sleek new addition to their home. "Look, Daddy," Imani exclaimed, pointing at the stairlift. "Can I try it now?" Marcus smiled, ruffling Imani's hair affectionately. "Soon, sweetheart. Let's just make sure everything's in order first." Lorraine felt a small sense of relief wash over her, hoping that this addition would provide Imani with more independence and comfort as she navigated their multi-story home. Imani, born with cerebral palsy, had always struggled with the stairs, and Lorraine was determined to make life easier for her child. As Marcus signed the final document and handed it back to the technician, the doorbell rang, shattering the momentary peace. Messer, the Carters' trusted butler, moved swiftly to answer it. When he opened the door, he found a middle-aged woman with a composed demeanor waiting on the other side. "Good afternoon," the woman said, her voice crisp and professional. "I'm Edith Hayes, the nanny Mr. Carter hired." Messer's eyebrows rose slightly, caught off guard by this unexpected visitor. He turned and called for Lorraine and Marcus, who approached with puzzled expressions. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter," Messer said. "This is Edith Hayes. She says she's here for the nanny position that Mr. Carter arranged." Lorraine's confusion deepened as she faced the unfamiliar woman, then turned to her husband. "Marcus, what is this about? I wasn't aware of any nanny being hired." Marcus looked equally surprised. I did speak with an agency last week, but I haven't made any final decisions. There must have been some miscommunication." Edith's smile remained fixed as she explained. "Mr. Carter contacted the agency about the position. They said you needed additional help with your daughter." Lorraine felt a twinge of frustration at her husband's unilateral action. She prided herself on being involved in all aspects of Imani's care, and the fact that Marcus had taken this step without consulting her left her feeling slighted. "Marcus, can I speak with you privately for a moment?" Lorraine asked. Her voice was tight with barely contained annoyance. "And Messer, please escort Ms. Edith to the office. We will see her there." As Messer led Edith to wait in the office, Lorraine rounded on her husband. "How could you do this without talking to me first?" she demanded. "Hiring a nanny for Imani is a huge decision, one we should have made together." Marcus held up his hands defensively. "Lorraine, I swear I didn't hire anyone. I just inquired with the agency. I meant to discuss it with you, but with all the work I've had lately, it slipped my mind." "This isn't just about extra help, Marcus," Lorraine replied, her frustration evident. "This is about our daughter. We should make these decisions together." They argued briefly, with Marcus trying to calm Lorraine and justify his actions. He told her that the agency was one of the best in the state and that they should give this a chance, after all the nannies here. Finally, he suggested they shouldn't keep the woman waiting too long. Lorraine reluctantly agreed, deciding to bring Imani along to join them. As they left the foyer, Lorraine took a deep breath, steeling herself for the meeting ahead. She couldn't shake the feeling that something about this situation didn't sit right with her, but she pushed her doubts aside for the moment. With a gentle call to Imani, who was still admiring the stairlift, she made her way to the office, determined to assess this unexpected addition to their household. The tension in Marcus's office was palpable as Lorraine entered with Imani by her side. Edith Hayes, the unexpected nanny, stood as they entered, her piercing gaze immediately focusing on Imani. The room felt smaller somehow, as if Edith's presence had expanded to fill every corner. Edith's lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes as she crouched down to Imani's level. "Hello there," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "I'm Miss Edith. What's your name?" Imani, usually chatty and full of life, seemed to shrink under Edith's intense scrutiny. Her eyes darted nervously between the stranger and her mother, seeking reassurance in familiar territory. The silence stretched on, uncomfortable and heavy. Lorraine watched the exchange with growing unease, noting how Edith's smile shifted ever so slightly as the moments ticked by without a response from Imani. "Well," Edith remarked, a hint of sarcasm coloring her tone, "it's good that a girl is quiet, especially around new people. Speaks to high breeding, doesn't it?" Lorraine felt a chill run down her spine at the comment. Though it might have seemed benign to others, she caught the subtle edge in Edith's voice, a hint of something darker lurking beneath the polite veneer. "Her name's Imani," she said. "She's 9 years old." Marcus, standing in the background, seemed oblivious to the undercurrent of tension. He chuckled lightly. "Oh, you should hear her when she gets going. Our Imani can talk up a storm when she's comfortable." Edith's eyes flickered to Marcus, her smile widening. "I'm sure she can, Mr. Carter. Children often need a firm hand to learn when to speak and when to listen." As Edith continued to interact with Imani, her questions became more probing, each one feeling like a test that Imani was failing. "What's your favorite subject in school, Imani? Do you have many friends? How do you help your mother around the house?" Lorraine could see Imani becoming increasingly agitated, her small body tensing with each question. She was about to intervene when Imani's discomfort peaked, resulting in a sudden outburst. Tears welled up in Imani's eyes as she began to cry, her breathing becoming labored and strained. She choked slightly, struggling to catch her breath between sobs. Lorraine immediately moved to comfort her daughter, kneeling beside her and rubbing soothing circles on her back. "It's okay, sweetheart. Take deep breaths for me, okay?" As Imani coughed and tried to regain control, she accidentally spat out some mucus, and it landed directly on Edith's pristine black heels. The room fell silent, save for Imani's hiccuping sobs. Edith's smile had vanished, replaced by a look of thinly veiled disgust. With deliberate slowness, she reached into her purse and pulled out a tissue, meticulously wiping the mucus from her shoe. "Well," Edith said, her voice clipped and cold, "it seems Imani could use some lessons in proper etiquette and muscle control. A little mucus never hurt anyone, but it's hardly becoming of a young lady." Lorraine felt her cheeks burn with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "Imani has cerebral palsy," she explained, fighting to keep her voice level. "It affects her muscle control, especially during emotional episodes. She can't always help these reactions." Edith's eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh, I'm well aware of cerebral palsy, Mrs. Carter. I've worked with many disabled children over the years. With the right guidance and discipline, I've trained them to function quite well in society, despite their limitations." Lorraine took a deep breath, reminding herself that they had agreed to give Edith a chance. "Well, Miss Hayes, perhaps we should discuss your experience and qualifications in more detail. Imani's care is very specialized, and we need to ensure that anyone working with her is fully prepared for the challenges." Edith's smile returned, sharp and predatory. "Of course, Mrs. Carter. I'd be happy to enlighten you on my methods. I assure you, by the time I'm done, Imani will be a model of good behavior and social grace." Edith's reaction was cold and clinical, her comments about Imani's behavior striking Lorraine as inappropriate and insensitive. Despite her misgivings, Lorraine felt pressured by Marcus to allow Edith a chance. She reluctantly agreed to a trial period for the evening, comforting herself with the knowledge that Messer, their trusted butler, would keep an eye on Edith. As they were wrapping up the meeting, Marcus approached Lorraine with an unexpected proposition. "Darling," he said, his voice low and excited, "I've just remembered. Our friend Henry from the golf club is hosting a casual BBQ party this evening. I think it would be a perfect opportunity for us to catch up with friends and relax a bit." Marcus threw a glance at Edith. "Edith, are you free this evening to nanny?" "Yes, sir, I am. I can start right away if you'd like," Edith said. Lorraine's eyes widened in surprise. "Right away? But Marcus, we've just met Edith. If this is her trial, don't you think we should stay home and supervise her first evening with Imani?" Marcus waved off her concerns with a smile. "Come on, Lorraine. It's the perfect chance to see how Edith handles things by herself. Messa will be here to watch her and help her with Imani. We can't hover over them all the time, can we?" Lorraine hesitated, her protective instincts warring with Marcus's logic. "I'm not sure, Marcus. It's too soon." "Lorraine," Marcus said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder, "you need to be less overprotective. Imani is 9 years old, and even with her condition, she needs to learn a bit of independence. Your constant presence might be making her overly attached." Reluctantly, Lorraine agreed, feeling torn between her motherly instincts and Marcus's rationalizations. As they prepared to leave, she lingered at the door, an inexplicable unease weighing on her. She glanced back at Imani, who was watching her with an anxious expression, sensing her mother's hesitation. Imani clung to Lorraine as they said goodbye, her small hands gripping Lorraine's arm tightly. Lorraine's heart ached, but Marcus, noticing the exchange, gently reminded her of his point about encouraging Imani's independence. Though Marcus's words were meant to reassure her, Lorraine couldn't shake her doubts. She gave Messa a last, meaningful look, silently conveying her expectations that he would remain vigilant in her absence. With a lingering glance toward Imani, Lorraine finally agreed to leave, though the unease remained. As they drove to Henry's house down the block, Lorraine's mind raced with worries and second thoughts. She couldn't help but feel that she was making a terrible mistake, abandoning Imani with a virtual stranger. But Marcus's enthusiasm for the evening out and his insistence that everything would be fine eventually wore down her resistance. At Henry's BBQ, Lorraine struggled to unwind despite finishing her first drink. She made polite conversation but frequently glanced at her phone, feeling a nagging need to check on Imani. Her thoughts drifted back to Edith's intense gaze and unsettling remarks from earlier, and she found it impossible to fully engage in the gathering. After some time, Lorraine stepped away from the crowd, deciding to call home. Her call rang unanswered, intensifying her anxiety. She frowned, feeling the pit of unease grow, and tried calling again, still receiving no response. Growing more uneasy, Lorraine accessed the home's CCTV feed from her phone. She cycled through the camera views, scanning each room carefully. Strangely, Imani was nowhere to be seen. Not in her bedroom, playroom, kitchen, or living room. Each empty room heightened Lorraine's concern. Unable to shake the ominous feeling, she decided she couldn't wait any longer. She returned to Marcus, insisting they needed to leave. "Lorraine, you're overreacting," Marcus said, trying to calm her. "The cameras might have missed Imani. They're probably outside, playing in the backyard. Edith is managing well enough without interruptions." But Lorraine, now fully in the grip of her motherly instincts, wouldn't be deterred. She apologized to their friends, explaining briefly that she needed to check on Imani, and left the party. Despite Marcus's attempts to downplay her concerns, she felt her decision was justified, determined to ensure her daughter was safe. As they drove home, Lorraine's mind raced with possibilities, each more worrying than the last. She silently prayed that her fears were unfounded, but the knot in her stomach told her otherwise. The drive home felt interminable to Lorraine, her anxiety mounting with each passing minute. Marcus, sensing her distress, attempted to reassure her, but his words fell on deaf ears. As soon as they pulled into the driveway, Lorraine was out of the car, rushing towards the house. She burst through the front door, calling out for Imani. The house was eerily quiet, intensifying her fears. Lorraine moved swiftly through the rooms, her heart pounding in her chest. Finally, she heard faint voices coming from the backyard. As she stepped onto the patio, the scene before her made her blood run cold. Edith was there with Imani, but something was wrong. Imani was without her walk-aid vest, struggling to maintain her balance on the uneven grass. What horrified Lorraine most were the visible bruises on Imani's legs. "What's going on here?" Lorraine demanded, rushing to Imani's side. "Why isn't she wearing her vest, and where did these bruises come from?" Edith turned. The look of surprise in her face was quickly replaced by a calm demeanor. "Mrs. Carter, I didn't expect you back so soon," she said, her tone nonchalant. "Imani and I were doing some therapeutic exercises to help build Imani's strength." Lorraine rushed to her daughter, kneeling beside her and gently examining the bruises. "Exercises? Look at her legs. What have you done?" Marcus looked concerned but not as alarmed as Lorraine. "What kind of exercises?" he asked. "Simple stretches and movements designed to improve muscle tone and coordination," Edith replied smoothly. "I've had great success with similar techniques in the past." Lorraine's protective instincts were in full force, but the bruises, and why remove her vest? That's there for her safety. Edith's voice took on a soothing tone. "Mrs. Carter, I understand your concern. The bruises are a normal part of the process, as Imani's muscles adjust to new movements. She fell down many times, but she's getting stronger. As for the vest, I removed it briefly to allow for a fuller range of motion. It's important not to become too reliant on aids." Marcus nodded slowly, seeming to consider Edith's words. "That does make some sense, Lorraine. We want Imani to grow stronger, don't we?" Yes, I think so, but this is too much for day one," Lorraine said, feeling torn between her instincts and the logical-sounding explanation. "And you should have consulted us first. These decisions can't be made without our input." Marcus, who had followed Lorraine into the backyard, looked shocked. "Edith, we hired you to care for Imani, not to conduct unauthorized therapy sessions," he said, his earlier defense of the nanny crumbling in the face of the disturbing scene. Edith looked appropriately contrite. "You're absolutely right, Mrs. Carter. I should have discussed this with you beforehand. I got carried away in my eagerness to help Imani progress. It won't happen again without your express permission." Marcus put a hand on Lorraine's shoulder. "Maybe we should hear more about these exercises, dear. If they could help Imani—" Lorraine hesitated, her earlier resolve weakening in the face of Edith's apparent expertise and Marcus's support. I suppose we could discuss it further, but no more unsupervised changes to Imani's care routine for now." Edith nodded earnestly. "Of course. I promise to communicate every step of the process with you both from now on." As they headed indoors, Lorraine couldn't shake her unease despite Edith's explanations. She vowed to keep a closer eye on things, even as she reluctantly agreed to give Edith another chance. Marcus seemed relieved at the resolution. "See, Lorraine, it was just a misunderstanding. I'm sure with clear communication, Edith can be a great help to Imani." Lorraine nodded, not entirely convinced but willing to try for Marcus's sake. As they settled in to discuss Edith's proposed care plan, Lorraine made a silent promise to herself to remain vigilant and trust her instincts, no matter what logical arguments were presented. The next morning, Lorraine woke early, her sleep having been fitful and plagued by worries. As she went downstairs, she heard Edith's voice coming from the kitchen, interacting with Imani. Approaching the kitchen quietly, Lorraine observed Edith and Imani's interaction. What she saw made her heart sink. Imani, usually energetic and talkative in the mornings, appeared quiet and withdrawn. She avoided eye contact with Edith, seeming almost fearful. Lorraine watched as Imani absently scratched at the bruises on her legs, wincing slightly at the touch. Edith noticed and sharply said, "A proper girl doesn't act like that. Stop fidgeting, Imani." The harsh tone in Edith's voice made Lorraine's blood boil. She was about to intervene when Imani's gaze flickered up, catching sight of her mother. The relief that washed over her daughter's face was palpable, and it broke Lorraine's heart. "Good morning, sweetheart. Lorraine said, entering the kitchen. She moved to Imani's side, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "How are you feeling today?" Imani leaned into her mother's touch but remained silent, her eyes darting nervously to Edith and back. Edith's demeanor changed instantly, her voice becoming saccharine sweet. "Oh, good morning, Mrs. Carter. Imani and I were just having a little chat." Lorraine's suspicion and unease grew. Imani used to be so spirited, especially in the morning. She loved breakfast. That yogurt bowl with honey Edith served her was her all-time favorite. So, what's with the look on her face? Did she make a wrong decision last night, giving Edith another chance, even for this short period? She had wished she could hang around to watch how Imani interacted with Edith, but her phone rang once again, and the screen displayed the number of the art gallery that had agreed to exhibit her artworks. "I have to take this call, sweetheart. I'm really sorry. We'll play later, all right?" she said, gently letting go of Imani and waving goodbye. Lorraine had just ended her call with the art gallery when she noticed the morning sun had fully risen, streaming through the dining room windows. She called Messa to clear away the breakfast dishes, her mind still buzzing from the conversation about her upcoming exhibition. Despite the exciting news, she couldn't shake the unease that had been growing since breakfast. She had watched Edith and Imani's interaction during the meal earlier, and Imani's subdued behavior and the way she avoided eye contact with Edith hadn't escaped Lorraine's notice. But she also knew that she had to give her a chance despite her worries. Edith had so much experience with kids in need, and as Marcus had already said, they should give her a chance, as it could be a big opportunity for Imani to cope better on her own. Probably all the warning signs were normal, as it simply required a different approach for Imani. A mother naturally worries about her daughter, but sometimes one has to trust others as well. As she was about to approach Edith, a sharp knock at the front door interrupted her thoughts. Curious about who could be visiting, Lorraine made her way to the entrance. She was surprised to find Officer Thomas Keating standing on her porch. His familiar face was a welcome sight, though the serious set of his jaw gave her pause. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter," Officer Keating said, his voice low and professional. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything. I'm conducting a routine neighborhood check. Mind if I come in for a moment?" Lorraine nodded, stepping aside to let him enter. "Of course, Officer Keating, please come in." As they moved into the foyer, Officer Keating's demeanor shifted subtly. His eyes scanned the room, eventually landing on Edith, who was visible through the doorway to the living room, where she was sitting with Imani on the carpet. Lorraine noticed a flicker of recognition in the officer's eyes, followed by a look of concern. "Mrs. Carter," Officer Keating said quietly, pulling Lorraine aside, "I need to speak with you privately for a moment." They moved to a corner of the foyer, out of earshot from Edith and Imani. Officer Keating's voice dropped even lower as he spoke. "I couldn't help but notice you have a new face in the house. The woman in there, is she a new helper?" Lorraine nodded, her brow furrowing. "Yes, she's a nanny we recently hired for our daughter. Is there a problem, officer?" Keating's expression grew grave. "I can't go into specifics, Mrs. Carter, but I want to advise you to be careful. One of your neighbors told us they heard loud cries coming from your home last evening. When my partner and I came to check, your butler said that you were not home and there's no cry." Lorraine felt a chill run down her spine. Why didn't Messa mention anything about the police visit last night? Wait, what do you mean, officer? Has she done something wrong? And what's with this random police check in the morning? You have to tell me if she's a criminal. My child's with her." Lorraine struggled to keep her voice low. The officer shook his head. "I was just making my morning round, Mrs. Carter, and as we received some reports last night and missed your presence, I thought it wouldn't hurt to drop by again this morning." With that cryptic warning, Officer Keating bid Lorraine goodbye and left. Lorraine stood in the foyer, her mind racing. The officer's words had confirmed her worst fears and reignited the spark of suspicion she'd been trying to suppress. She glanced towards the living room, where Edith was still sitting with Imani, playing with the dollhouse that Marcus bought her a few months ago on her birthday. The nanny looked up, meeting Lorraine's gaze with a smile that suddenly seemed sinister. Lorraine forced herself to smile back, not wanting to alert Edith to her growing suspicions. "Thank you, officer," she said. "About your nanny, trust your instincts, Mrs. Carter. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't." The officer excused himself, and Lorraine walked back to the house, her resolve hardened. She needed to know more about Edith, and she needed to know now. Her daughter's safety was at stake, and she wouldn't rest until she uncovered the truth behind the woman she had unwittingly invited into their home. After Officer Keating's visitation, Lorraine had spent the entire day at her desk, immersed in thought. She remembered the promise she'd made to play with Imani, but couldn't shake the curiosity gnawing at her. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as she dove into an online search for information about Edith Hayes, hoping to find anything that might either validate Officer Keating's subtle warning or put her mind at ease. But with each passing minute, her frustration and worry only deepened. To her dismay, she found almost no information on her new nanny. No social media profiles, no job listings, not even a LinkedIn page or any detailed records to verify her experience. Each click into Edith's background led to dead ends. It was as if the woman barely existed in the digital world. Lorraine tried different search combinations, looking for any trace of Edith's supposed extensive experience with special needs children. But each query led to another dead end. The lack of information was in itself deeply troubling. In this day and age, everyone left some kind of digital footprint. Edith's near-total absence from the internet felt deliberate, as if she was intentionally hiding her past. Lorraine leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She thought back to the bruises on Imani's legs, Edith's dismissive attitude about them, and Imani's subdued behavior since Edith's arrival. Combined with Officer Keating's warning and this mysterious lack of background information, it all painted a disturbing picture. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had invited a dangerous stranger into their home, someone who might be a threat to Imani or her family. The thought made her stomach churn with guilt and fear. Lorraine glanced at the clock. It was almost late, past Imani's bedtime, but she knew she wouldn't be able to sleep with these unanswered questions hanging over her. She made a decision. First thing in the morning, she would go to the police station and speak with Officer Keating directly. She needed to know exactly what he meant by his warning, what he knew about Edith that he couldn't say outright. As she shut down her computer, Lorraine heard a soft whimper coming from Imani's room. She rushed to check on her daughter, finding Imani tossing restlessly in her sleep, her face scrunched up as if in pain or fear. No, I want mommy, no, go away." Lorraine gently stroked Imani's hair, soothing her back into a peaceful sleep. As she watched her daughter's face relax, Lorraine's determination solidified. She would protect Imani at all costs, no matter what it took. Tomorrow she would get to the bottom of this, and if her suspicions were confirmed, she would do whatever was necessary to remove this threat from their lives. Sleep would be elusive tonight, but Lorraine would use the quiet hours to plan her next moves. One way or another, she would uncover the truth about Edith Hayes. The stakes were too high for anything less than her full vigilance and determination. The next morning, Lorraine woke early, having barely slept. She left a note for Marcus explaining that she had an errand to run, careful not to mention her true destination. As she drove to the police station, her mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. The station was quiet when she arrived, the morning shift just settling in. Lorraine approached the front desk, asking to speak with Officer Keating. After a short wait, she was led to a small interview room where Keating was waiting, a concerned expression on his face. "Mrs. Carter," he greeted her, gesturing for her to sit. "I had a feeling I might be seeing you soon." Lorraine cut straight to the chase. "Officer Keating, I need to know what you couldn't tell me yesterday about Edith Hayes. What do you know about her?" Keating sighed, his expression grave. "Mrs. Carter, what I'm about to tell you isn't official police business. There have been no formal charges filed, but—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Edith Hayes's name has come up with complaints in several towns over the past few years. When I caught sight of her face in your house yesterday, even from a distance, I knew it was the same person." Lorraine felt her heart rate quicken. What kind of complaints? Nothing that ever resulted in criminal charges, but the pattern is disturbing, Keating explained. Families would hire her as a nanny or caregiver, usually for children with special needs. After a while, there would be reports of strange behavior, psychological manipulation, even some instances of what could be considered physical abuse, though nothing that could be definitively proven. Lorraine's mind flashed to the bruises on Imani's legs. Why hasn't she been arrested if there have been multiple complaints? Keating shook his head. She's clever. She never stays in one place long enough for a solid case to be built, and she seems to target vulnerable families, often those who might be hesitant to involve authorities due to their social standing or other factors. What exactly did these families report? Lorraine pressed, needing to know the full extent of what they might be dealing with. Keating's expression darkened. There were reports of cruel disciplinary measures, isolating children from their parents, even some instances of withholding medication or necessary care. But again, nothing that could be conclusively proven in court. Lorraine felt a chill run down her spine. She thought of Imani's subdued behavior, the fear in her eyes when Edith was around. It all made a horrifying kind of sense now. "Mrs. Carter," Keating said, leaning forward, his voice low and urgent, "if you have any doubts about this woman, any at all, you need to remove her from your home immediately. And if you have evidence of any violence or misconduct, you should say it right now. Your daughter's safety could be at risk." Lorraine nodded, her resolve hardening. "Thank you, Officer Keating. You've confirmed what I've been fearing. I'll take care of this today." As she left the police station, Lorraine's mind was made up. She would confront Edith and remove her from their home, no matter what it took. But first, she needed to check on Imani. The thought of leaving her daughter alone with Edith for even a moment longer filled her with dread. She drove home, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, praying that she wasn't too late to prevent any harm from coming to her beloved child. Lorraine arrived home, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. As she entered, Messer, the butler, approached to greet her, but Lorraine quickly raised a finger to her lips, signaling him to be quiet. "Messer," she whispered, "I need to speak with you, but we have to be quiet." They moved to a corner, and Lorraine quickly explained her suspicions about Edith. Messer's eyes widened as he listened to her concerns. "Messer," Lorraine asked, her voice low and urgent, "did the police come by a few days ago when Marcus and I was away?" Messer nodded, his brow furrowing. "Yes, Mrs. Carter, they did come by asking if everything was all right." Lorraine's heart raced. "Did you hear anything from Imani's room? Any crying or distress?" Messer shook his head, looking confused. "No, Mrs. Carter. I didn't hear anything unusual from Miss Imani's room. Why do you ask?" Lorraine bit her lip, her worry deepening. "The police reported hearing crying. Messer, where were you during this time?" The butler looked slightly embarrassed. I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter. I was feeling quite drowsy that day after dinner, and had taken a nap. I woke up when the police arrived." Lorraine's concern intensified. It was highly unusual for Messer to have fallen asleep early. He was normally awake until midnight, always ready to help with whatever they needed. Had Edith drugged him or slipped something into his dinner? If she had, there might be evidence, and the police could open an investigation. What frightened Lorraine the most, though, was the thought that, with Messer asleep, who knew what Edith might have done unnoticed? "Thanks, Messer. And is Marcus home?" "Yes, ma'am. Your husband is at the garage. Do you want me to call him?" Lorraine shook her head. "No, but I'd like you to let him know about the police visit from a few days ago, and please make sure he stays calm about it. I don't want Imani getting any more frightened." With this new information, Lorraine felt an even greater sense of urgency. She moved through the house, listening for any sound of Edith or Imani. The house was eerily silent, setting her nerves further on edge. As she passed the bathroom, she heard a faint murmur. Lorraine paused, her breath catching in her throat. She approached the partially open door, careful not to make a sound. Through the crack she saw a scene that made her blood run cold. Edith was there, holding a glass of water. But it wasn't just any water. Lorraine watched in horror as Edith dipped the glass into the toilet bowl, filling it with yellow piss water. "Now, Imani." Edith's voice was sickeningly sweet, a stark contrast to her actions. "Be a good girl and drink this. It's your punishment for throwing up your dinner again." Imani, who was seated in her wheelchair, tried to turn away her head, but Edith tightened her grip on her cheeks. "Good girls don't waste what's given to them," Edith whispered, her tone taking on a menacing edge. Lorraine felt a surge of rage and protective instinct course through her. Without a second thought, she burst into the bathroom, shouting, "Stop! Get away from my daughter!" Edith's head snapped up, her expression shifting from shock to irritation. She slowly released Imani, who immediately scrambled towards her mother. "Mrs. Carter," Edith said, her voice eerily calm, "I was just teaching Imani an important lesson about gratitude and resourcefulness." Lorraine pulled Imani close, shielding her from Edith. "Gratitude, resourcefulness. You were trying to force my daughter to drink pee." Edith's facade began to crack, her true nature seeping through. "Your coddling has made her weak," she spat. "I was merely trying to toughen her up, to prepare her for the real world." Lorraine felt Imani trembling against her, and her fury peaked. "Get out of my house," she snarled. "Now!" But Edith didn't move. Instead, her lips curled into a sneer. "You don't understand what I'm trying to do here. These children need discipline and structure. Your soft approach is doing more harm than good." As Edith took a step forward, Lorraine heard footsteps in the hallway. Messer appeared in the doorway, having heard the commotion. His eyes widened as he took in the scene. "Messer," Lorraine said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "call the police, now." As Messer pulled out his phone, Edith's composure finally shattered. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You have no idea what you're doing to that child with your overprotectiveness." But Lorraine stood her ground, holding Imani close. She had seen Edith's true colors now, and she wouldn't rest until this woman was out of their lives for good. As they waited for the police to arrive, the tension in the room was palpable. Lorraine stood protectively in front of Imani, her eyes never leaving Edith. The nanny's earlier facade of calm professionalism had completely crumbled, revealing a seething anger beneath. Suddenly, Edith's eyes darted toward the living room. In a flash, she made a break for it, knocking over a side table as she ran. The crash of ceramic vases shattering on the floor filled the air. "Messer, stop her!" Lorraine shouted, unable to give chase while protecting Imani. Edith reached the living room, frantically looking for an escape route. She grabbed more decorative pieces, hurling them behind her to create obstacles. The room became a hazardous maze of broken porcelain and overturned furniture. Messer, alerted by the commotion, rushed to the foyer, blocking Edith's path to the door. "You're not going anywhere, Miss Hayes," he said firmly, his usually calm demeanor replaced by stern determination. Edith, desperation clear in her eyes, lunged at Messer. They grappled, Edith's frenzied strength matching Messer's steady resolve. For a moment, it seemed Edith might overpower him. But then, Marcus appeared from behind, having circled through another entrance. With a swift move, he wrapped his arms around Edith, pulling her away from Messer. Edith thrashed wildly, but Marcus held firm, using his legs to further restrain her movements. "It's over, Edith. You're not harming my family," Marcus grunted, struggling to keep her contained. "The police are on their way. You're not getting out of this." Edith's composure shattered completely. "You don't understand," she screamed, still fighting against Marcus's hold. "I'm trying to help these children. You're the ones hurting them with your coddling. These children need to be taught how to survive in a world that won't love them. Your soft approach is crippling her more than her disability ever could." "By forcing them to drink toilet water? By inflicting bruises and calling it exercise?" Lorraine countered, her voice rising. "That's not preparation for life. That's abuse." Just then, the sound of sirens filled the air. Moments later, police officers burst through the front door, quickly taking in the chaotic scene. As the police entered the house, Edith made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "This is all a misunderstanding," she said, her voice suddenly honey-sweet again. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter are simply overreacting to standard disciplinary measures." The officers moved swiftly, taking Edith into custody. As they handcuffed her, Edith continued to rant, her words a mixture of justifications and accusations. "You'll regret this," she hissed at Lorraine. "When Imani grows up unable to stand on her own, you'll wish you'd listened to me. You rich people only know how to make and spend money, but you haven't the slightest clue how to raise a child. You're raising a spoiled breed, a disgrace to humanity." Lorraine stood her ground, holding Imani close and covering her ears. "The only thing I regret is not trusting my instincts sooner. Imani will grow up surrounded by love and proper care, and she'll thrive because of it, not despite it." As Edith was led away, Lorraine turned to Marcus and Messa, gratitude clear in her eyes. "Thank you both," she said softly. "I don't know what would have happened if—" "It's over now," Marcus reassured them. "We're safe and Edith won't hurt anyone else." Lorraine watched as Edith was placed in the police car, feeling a mix of relief and lingering anxiety. She knew this ordeal wasn't over yet, but at least the immediate threat had been removed from their home. The next few hours blurred into a series of police statements. After Edith was taken away, detectives, investigators, and Officer Keating himself filled every corner of their home. Lorraine recounted every detail she could remember, from her first suspicions about Edith to the chilling bathroom incident. The officers listened intently, their expressions growing darker with each new revelation. "Mrs. Carter," he began, his voice low and serious, "I wanted to update you personally on the situation with Edith Hayes." Lorraine nodded, steeling herself for whatever news he might bring. "What's happening, officer?" "We've placed Ms. Hayes under arrest," Keating explained. "Your testimony, combined with the evidence we found in her possession and the statements from your daughter and your butler, was enough to hold her. But there's more." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "After your report this morning to my office, I reached out to the other jurisdictions where complaints had been filed against her, and the good news is we can use your case now to open the floodgates. I have received calls from several families who are willing to come forward with their own stories." Lorraine felt a wave of emotions wash over her. "Will they be able to press charges?" she asked. Keating nodded. "It looks that way. With multiple testimonies and evidence from different cases, we're building a strong case against her. She won't be able to hurt any more children." Officer Keating placed a comforting hand on Lorraine's shoulder. "You did the right thing, Mrs. Carter. Your quick action and trust in your instincts may have saved not just your daughter, but countless other children as well." Lorraine nodded, a wave of exhaustion mingling with relief. As the police car pulled away, she knew they had a long road ahead, likely involving court battles and countless challenges. Yet she was resolute, prepared to face whatever came their way, strengthened by the love and understanding that Edith had so coldly disregarded. In the quiet that followed Edith's arrest, the Carter household was left to grapple with the aftermath of the harrowing ordeal. Lorraine sat on the living room couch, holding Imani close, whispering soothing words to her frightened daughter. The child's body trembled slightly, a mix of fear and relief coursing through her. "It's okay now, sweetheart," Lorraine murmured, gently stroking Imani's hair. "Mummy's here, and that bad lady won't ever come near you again." Imani looked up at her mother. "Why did she do those things, Mommy? Was I bad?" Lorraine's heart clenched at the innocent question. "No, darling, you weren't bad at all. Some people just don't understand how to care for others properly. But that's not your fault. Never think that." Imani threw her arms around her mother, finally letting out the tears she had been holding back. Lorraine held her close, vowing silently that she would do whatever it took to help her daughter heal from this traumatic experience. Messa entered the room, carrying a tray with hot tea and some light snacks. The faithful butler had been a rock throughout the ordeal, and Lorraine felt a surge of gratitude for his unwavering support. "Messa," she said, "we can't thank you enough for everything you've done. You've been such a crucial part of keeping Imani safe. Messa nodded solemnly. It is my honor and duty, Mrs. Carter. Imani's well-being is of utmost importance to me as well. As Lorraine comforted Imani, Marcus paced the room, his face a mask of guilt and anger. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Lorraine, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. I should have listened to you from the beginning. Lorraine looked up at her husband, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and residual frustration. Yes, you should have, she agreed, her tone firm but not unkind. I know it's hard. We've been doing this for 9 years, but our child needs us. Maybe later, after Imani has recovered from this incident, we can find other ways to make time for us. Marcus nodded, running a hand through his hair. I know. I got caught up in the idea of giving Imani more independence, of not being overprotective, so we can have some free time to strengthen other aspects of our lives. But I realize now that there's a difference between being overprotective and being rightfully cautious. He knelt beside the couch, looking at both Lorraine and Imani. I promise from now on, we make all decisions about Imani's care together and carefully. No more unilateral choices. The family stood together, shaken but united. The ordeal had been terrifying, but it had also shown them the strength they possessed when they stood together. As the adrenaline began to fade, Lorraine knew they had a long road ahead of them to heal from this trauma, but she was certain that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead.